Hello. Yes, I am stood up for this video. Hi, if you didn't know, I'm Siobhan. Welcome to my channel. I am standing up because I have a lot of books to get through and I want to do kind of mini reviews for each one and maybe more in-depth reviews for some of the books I haven't already talked about on my channel. But I've got a lot to get through. I read loads this month. I read 15 books in a month. I am still in awe that I was able to do that. It may not be as many as some other people on BookTube and things, but like I read 7 books all of last year, so that's impressive for me. This video today is just going to be a bit of a wrap up of everything I read, quick thoughts on what I thought of them, and then at the end I'll go through some stats. So if you're interested in reading stats, stick around till the end. Also, if you like this video, obligatory like, share, subscribe, reminder, do it, please, add a comment. It really helps me to know which videos you're enjoying. I'm just going to do this in a random order and I'm going to start with Salt by Catrin Kean. Now, this was really kindly sent to me by Catrin. Catrin just got in touch with me and said, would you like a copy of my new book to review? And I read a synopsis of the book and I thought this sounds right up my alley. I would really love a copy of the book. So thank you, Catrin and Tagoma Press for sending this to me. I gave this one 5 stars. It's a really sweet, short story that covers the lifespan, basically, of one person. It really follows Ellen, who is a domestic who comes from Cardiff in the 1800s, who dreams of adventure and dreams of getting out of the traditional roles that society have forced upon her. And then she meets Samuel, who's a ship's cook from Barbados, and it's kind of about their love story, how they have to face certain barriers, racism, particularly in Britain, gender roles. It skips years throughout her life and focuses on the most important parts of that life and that journey. And it also skips between later in Ellen's life during World War I and earlier during the 19th century. And it is based on the true story of Kean's own grandparents. On kind of a related note, I also read Black and British by David Olusoga this month, and these two were really interesting to read side by side because this is a comprehensive history of Black British history from medieval times through to now, and this really talks about a particular moment in Black British history and the discrimination and the barriers faced against interracial couples in the late 19th century. What's really interesting is that this doesn't talk much about Wales in this book. It does talk about the race riots in Cardiff in 1919 and in Barry and Newport as well. If that's something you didn't know about, I would really encourage you to look into that some more. I'll leave some links below to some people who've done some really good research and a documentary about that as well. That is really the only mention of Welsh Black history in here, as far as I remember. So it was really interesting to read a depiction of life in Wales at that time as well. But they also travel the world, and some of it is set in San Francisco. What I really loved about it is I felt like you get a really strong sense of the characters. I feel like Kean, her writing is so beautiful. You can tell she's also a poet. You know, she's been blurbed by Carol Ann Duffy, who says Salt is a novel of rare beauty, and I can see why. One thing I think Kean is really great at is creating these poetic, descriptive moments, particularly at the end of her chapters. She likes to kind of leave you on like a beautiful image. For example, she stood in the doorway watching his slight shape walk away in the darkness, and she was aware that something strange had happened to her body. It was like the centre had fallen out of her, left her drifting in the wind. I think Catrin's eye for detail is so precise. It's comprised of quite a lot of short chapters, which I think works for the story. It just kind of has glimpses of snapshots in their life, and you see how things progress over the years, people who die, things that come and go. It's beautiful, it's tragic, but it's also hopeful. I would really recommend if you enjoy short poetic books. I've already talked a bit about this one. This is an incredible read. I am shocked, I am horrified at the fact that we don't learn about Black British history in school, or at least I didn't. If you want to know more about where the racist structures in society have come from, about the history that we are not told in schools, I would definitely recommend that you read this book. I know that he also has a series on the BBC which is also called Black and British, which it kind of ties in with the book. It might be something that you'd be interested in watching, but I would really recommend this. It's obviously horrific and horrible to read at times, some of the horrific suffering that Britain has put its Black citizens throughout history. But there's also stuff in here that you really won't know. Positive examples of people who have survived and thrived in Britain that we just aren't talked about because Black British history has just been kind of systematically erased from our culture, seemingly. So I think this is a really, really important book to read, and I would really recommend it. I'm not going to rate it because I don't really like to rate non-fiction, but I will say it's an excellent book to read if you want to learn more about this topic. Next, oh my god, I'm taking way too much time to talk about these books. Next. So, I came across this booktube channel from Jen Campbell, who I really enjoyed watching her videos. She, I think, gives really good reviews. She is also a disabled woman, which I think is really important representative-wise to see on YouTube, to see amongst booktubers. She talks about that on her channel, and weirdly, when I was watching her like introductory video, she mentioned that she's also an author, and that one of the books that she wrote is called Weird Things Customers Say in Bookshops. And I went, hold on, I'm pretty sure that I have that book, and I did. So watching that video inspired me to read her book straight away, and I rushed through this one. It's really cute. I would really recommend it. It's just a lot of little anecdotes about what people say in bookshops. Perfect coffee table book. Loved it. I think I rated this 4 or 5 stars. Next, we have one of my favourite books of the year, Felix Ever After by Kacen Callender. I've talked a lot about this in my 7 books in 7 days and in my mid-year book freakout tag, so please check those out. I will put a link in the corner if you want to hear more about what I thought. Basically, he's a sweet cinnamon roll. This is such a lovely read, a YA contemporary about a trans man called Felix who goes to an art school in New York. I would really, really recommend. I rated this 5 stars. Next, Upright Women Wanted by Sarah Gailey. Again, I've talked about this a lot in previous videos, which I'll link. I love the world. I love the potential of the characters. I felt like it was too short at only 176 pages and didn't really delve enough into that world and into those characters, and I wanted to see more, and I hope this is the start of a series, and I would like it to be a TV series where they really explore it more in depth. I think I rated this 4 stars. Next, Seconds by Bryan Lee O'Malley, another one of my favourite books of the year. The art is beautiful, the story is really inspiring, and there's kind of nothing more relatable than this story if you're in your 20s and you're going through all of the struggles of that decade. I would really, really, really recommend this as a graphic novel. It's by the same author as the Scott Pilgrim vs. the World series, so that will give you a sense of the tone. It's got magic realism concept at the centre of it. I rated this 5 stars. Really beautiful. I've talked more about this in other videos as well, so I'm going to move on. Her Royal Highness by Rachel Hawkins. I also talk about this in my 7 books in 7 days video. Beautiful queer romance, princess in a Scottish boarding school, and a kind of average American girl who ends up going to this boarding school. Really lovely female-female romance, a little bit cliche. I rated this 4 stars. Now, onto the ebooks and audiobooks that I read this month. First one I have is White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. No rating because I often don't like to rate non-fiction. It is a stunning breakdown of exactly why white people feel so threatened when they are called out for doing something racist or institutionally racist, and a great way that she talks about how to break down your own white fragility and how to open yourself up to criticism and how to repair situations where maybe you have messed up. I would really recommend this if you are a white person who has never faced institutional racism and want to learn more about how you can be a better ally. Next, I also read Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Reni Eddo-Lodge. Again, unrated because I don't like to rate non-fiction. Another excellent book breaking down institutional racism. This one is more focused on Britain, whereas White Fragility is more focused on the USA. So it was really good for me to read something from a British perspective as well. This one is more about the experience of being a black person, trying to talk about race and trying to break down those barriers with other people, and how we need to abandon this idea that we are all just colorblind and that will solve racism, and breaks down the fallacy of those ideas. Next, The Deep by Rivers Solomon. This one I rated 5 stars. It is a short, very poetic, not really narrative driven, more kind of metaphor and character driven story that is based on the concept of what if African slaves who were thrown overboard by white slavers in the middle of the ocean gave birth to creatures that became mermaid-esque, but who carried the memories of that trauma, of that past within them. And there is one person who is a historian who carries all of those memories for the rest of the society. And it's, again, a metaphor for racial trauma that is passed down from generation to generation and how it can still be a wound on an entire group of people. It's obviously harrowing and dark and sad, but there is also hope within it. It's beautifully, poetically written. I would really recommend it. Next, On the Come Up by Angie Thomas, a YA contemporary story about a 16-year-old girl who wants to become a rapper, who faces a lot of barriers in her life, including poverty, institutional racism in her school and in her area. It navigates a lot of issues around race and poverty and class and gender in a really clear, simple way, in a really engaging way. You can invest in the characters. I listened to the audiobook for this one, which I would really recommend because the audiobook narrator for it is phenomenal and does the rap battle parts really friggin' well. And even though it deals with some dark themes, it kind of left me with a really hopeful feeling at the end. 5 stars for this one. I'm getting through these. Only 3 left. I can do it. Next, we've got The Summer Book by Tove Jansson. This is a book set in Finland on a remote island, and it's a story of a grandmother and a granddaughter. The mother has died pre the start of the book, and the father is kind of this absent figure within it. It explores the landscape of the island and the environment of the area and some of the characters that they encounter. It's just a small series of beautiful little vignettes. I think I gave this one 3 or 4 stars. It's very atmospheric, it's very beautiful. I love the relationship between the grandmother and the granddaughter. It's kind of this mixture of real love and affection, but also consternation, and they're almost more like friends than like a parental figure and a child. So it's really sweet to read. It's very light on plot, so if you are somebody who needs a bit more of a narrative meat to get into, you may find it a little bit frustrating at times, but I can see why it's a Finnish classic. 2 left. All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. Fantastic memoir, again unrated because it's a memoir, it's non-fiction. He's an LGBTQIA+ activist, and he talks about the experiences he has of being gay and black and the intersectionalities of those things. He talks about it beautifully. It's a really important memoir. I can imagine it being really helpful for young queer people navigating those same issues. I would really, really recommend it. The audiobook is also read by George M. Johnson himself, which adds another kind of layer of power and authenticity to it, which I really appreciated. Finally, we have Recursion by Blake Crouch. This one I think I rated 3 stars. It was kind of a fun romp. It was very film-esque. It follows the concept of what if one day people start to mysteriously have these memories of another life that they never actually led, and this is diagnosed as an illness that a lot of people have, that they start to remember lives they never had. It follows really 2 characters, one of whom is a detective trying to kind of investigate this mystery, and another of whom is a scientist who may be involved in how all of this began. I will also say it does end up involving time travel, which I don't think I necessarily expected going into the book because it doesn't mention that in the blurb, but it ended up being very focused around that. I think it was a really fun read. I think it was very fast-paced plot. You can imagine it being a film or a TV series. I didn't think the characters were very inventive or engaging, but I enjoyed it as again, like a beach read, like a fast-paced plot. But for me, it was only like a 3 stars. I forgot to talk about The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. I think I gave this one 3 or 4 stars, probably 3.5. It was fine. I feel like it didn't live up to the amazing premise of doing a Groundhog Day type murder mystery where you inhabit different people involved in the murder every day and you try and solve it. I think it added too many complicated rules to that simple premise, and it was a little bit confusing for me, but that may have also been because I was listening to the audiobook and I was trying to listen to it in like chunks across several days, and I found that aspect of it a little bit confusing, and I'm not sure I'm convinced by the twist at the end. So as much as I enjoyed it, I think it's still a 3.5 or a 3 for me. Have I done it? Did I do it? I think I did. That was a lot of books to talk about. Now, let's get into the stats. Hi, what's up? Hello, how we doing? So it's like 4 days later. I underestimated how long it would take me to figure out all of the stats for the books that I've read so far this year. I'm not very good at mathematics, as it turns out, or figuring out how to make pie charts, but I've finally done it, and I'm excited to share with you the stats. This video is going to be a little bit later than I planned. Sorry. I'm going to read off of my laptop because why not? Some common themes. Love was a very common theme, LGBT books, community, racial identity and anti-racism, feminism, time, and friendship were very common themes throughout the books that I've read so far this year, and I feel like that is pretty reflective of the books that I like to read and some of the themes that really interest me. I should mention I've read 35 books so far this year, which is not as many as some of the other videos that I'm watching. I only read 35, but that is a big jump up for me. There is a fly that is just determined to make all of the noise today. Can you stop? Alright, so genre of books that I read this year. A really interesting mix of different things. It's an interesting balance that there's not one genre that jumps out as being like bigger than most of the others. So I suppose the biggest numbers on there are 15% mystery and 15% historical. What I did with this was that if I thought a book fit into more than one of the genres, so say it was a mystery but it was also historical, then I would like put it in twice, if that makes sense. I'd put it in for mystery and historical. So there ended up being 5 books that I read that I felt overlapped a couple of genres. And I think that generally seems to be like the genre that I'm reading the most of, is mysteries, and particularly those set in like historical periods. So that was quite interesting to see. Oh, I'm also 15% sci-fi as well, so that was one of my biggest categories. Also not surprised by that. I like to read a lot of sci-fi or more like speculative fiction. There's also quite a bit of literary fiction there at 13%, 12% contemporary, 12% non-fiction. That feels about right to me as well. I feel like I read quite a lot of literary fiction. I've been reading more contemporary this year than I have in the past, and non-fiction I tend to read quite a lot of in audiobook form. I quite like to have like a non-fiction on in the background as I'm doing something else, because I feel like it's easier to follow a non-fiction in an audiobook form. I'm not really sure why. I suppose because you're not necessarily always following a narrative in the same way. You're following a lot of shorter points and stories rather than following one character for a long time. On the smaller side, fantasy, which is quite small percentage of fantasy books. Like looking at the raw numbers, I only read 2 books that I would consider fantasy, and I think one of them was probably a reread of Philip Pullman, The Amber Spyglass. So that's something I definitely want to start reading more of, is more fantasy. As a young person, I was never really into kind of Lord of the Rings type fantasy, and so I haven't really grown up with it and been in love with it. So that is something I would definitely like to read more of. Only 5% romance as well. I'm not surprised. I feel like I'm reading less and less romance as I get older. Am I becoming more cynical? I don't know. I wouldn't mind reading more romance though. It's not something that I'm like against or that I don't like reading. It's just not something that I've been gravitating towards lately, but that could change. 5% plays, which is quite low for me as someone who loves theatre. I haven't been reading many plays, mainly because I'm slightly heartbroken about the fact that all the theatres are closed. But I haven't counted in that plays that I've watched via YouTube, via like National Theatre Live and things like that, are not included in there. Those are just plays that I've purely read. So I've only read 2 plays so far this year, but I've watched a lot more than that. Classics, only 3%, so I think that's only 1 classic that I've read so far, which is very low for me. But I think I've been trying to catch up on a lot of stuff that is talked about on Booktube, so I haven't necessarily been going back to those classics that I really love to read. That's something I want to read more of the rest of the year as well. So it's kind of an interesting breakdown. It confirms what I think about myself, which is when people ask me like, what type of books do you read? I find it quite hard to answer because I read quite a wide range of different things. I'm regretting holding this laptop up because it's kind of heavy, so I may lower it down. I hope you don't mind. My average rating over the past 6 months has been a 3.9, which I feel like is quite high. I've got quite a few 5 stars and 4 stars in there and very few 2 or 1 stars. I've had a very good reading year so far. I've been really enjoying everything I've been reading. I did go through and retrospectively lower some of my ratings as well. I think looking at them with a little bit of a step back and thinking about the other books that I've read this year has given me a bit more of a perspective. On some of the ones maybe I gave 5 or 4 stars, I might have bumped them down to a 3 or a 4. So if you want to know what I rated everything, you can go check out Goodreads as well, which I'll link down below. Right, next, let's look at some author data. So I read mostly from new authors that I've never read from before, which I'm quite excited about. So it was really exciting this year to discover so many great new authors. Again, I talk more in my mid-year book freakout tag about some of my favorite authors that I discovered this year. So that was 89% of authors I've never read before, and 11% of authors I've read before, which were Philip Pullman, Andre Aciman, Hilary Mantel, and Madeline Miller, so not very many. In terms of the gender of the authors that I read, I'm quite interested in looking at this to make sure that I maintain like a gender balance, or that I'm reading from authors whose gender identity is a protected characteristic. So I read 49% of female authors, 6% were written by one man and one woman, 8% non-binary authors, and 37% male authors. Just kind of an interesting statistic for me, just to keep track of if I'm reaching my goals of reading from more underrepresented groups. This fly is just flying around and around and around. Where's my cat to chase it when I need him? My hour of need, he's nowhere to be found. Meal times, he's here all the time, meowing and a meowing. But when I need him to chase something for me, nah, he's gone. I'm joking, I love my cat. Might even insert a little clip here of him being adorable. Oh, hello. You come to nag me? Okay, we've talked about genre, we've talked about author, we've talked about rating, modes of reading. So how did I read these books? Did I read a physical book, an audiobook, an ebook, etc.? So, very high percentage of physical books, which is my favourite way to read, so I'm not surprised. 60% of the books that I read, I had in my hands. 26% were ebooks, which is higher actually than I would have expected because I don't love to just exclusively read an ebook. I will usually read an ebook if I kind of have no other choice, like if I need to read it very quickly, or if I can't get a hold of a physical copy for whatever reason. I suppose being stuck in a pandemic, it's been a bit harder to borrow physical books from the library. I have 8% audiobooks, which is a bit lower than I would have expected because I do listen to a lot of audiobooks. It does explain when I add in the 6%, which was that I read the ebook and the audiobook, so I switched between the two, which then makes it 14% audiobook. And keeping on the same theme, I owned 86% of the books that I read, whether that was owning the ebook, the audiobook, or the physical book, and I borrowed 14%, which is a lot lower than I would like. I am going to look into borrowing more in the future, and hopefully I'll get to use my library services more often now that the lockdown is kind of lifting and libraries are opening properly again. I have been using the BorrowBox app throughout the quarantine, but I don't love to read ebooks, and not everything is available on there, so I've had a bit of a struggle to use that as much as I would like to, but that's really highlighted to me that I need to use it more. And equally, I did just get Scribd as well, which is a subscription service where you pay every month, but you can borrow ebooks and audiobooks off of there and download that, so I'm looking forward to using that more. Next, average page length of the books that I read. So my average page length was about 325 pages, which is quite good, I think. Considering like the longest book that I read was something like, let me check, 904 pages, and the shortest was probably about 100. No, the shortest was 72 pages, which was one of the plays that I read. Average year release date of the book. So far in 2020, I've read a lot of 2019 releases. I'm catching up. I'm trying to catch up on all the stuff that I started watching on BookTube last year, and all of the books that all the BookTubers are raving about that I haven't read yet. So that's probably why there's quite a lot of 2019 releases in there. There's a few 2020 as well. And also generally most of it is from that like 2016 onwards period. And then there are very few that I read pre-2010. And very, very few that I read pre-1990, which again is kind of rare for me because I do like to read a lot of classics generally, but I think I haven't really been focusing on classics so far this year, so maybe that'll change in the second half of this year, who knows. Next, the age range of the books that I read. So I read mostly adult books, which I feel like is pretty on brand for me. I feel like that is mostly what I'm interested in reading, and 23% YA. So again, I feel like that's quite accurate to like how much I like to read. I like to read a lot of adult books, literary fiction, historical, mysteries, sci-fi, but also I really loved like Felix Ever After is one of the favorite books that I read this year so far, so I'm really loving diving a bit into YA as well. I also kept data on the country that the book that I read was set in. I feel like most of the books were set either in the UK or the USA. Other countries that I visited in my reading this year so far include Italy, the Arctic, Iran, Ireland, Greece, Germany and Austria, Scotland, Finland, Barbados, Sierra Leone, Jamaica. And I think that's it. I think I could do better. I think I could explore some more of the world. A lot of it is very USA or UK centric. So I'm going to try and branch out in the second half of this year as well. So this has been really fun. This has been really good for me to kind of keep track of where I am with my reading and really see where I can improve, what areas I want to branch out into more. I hope you enjoyed watching this and this was interesting to you too. If it was, please remember to give it a like, please remember to comment and click subscribe if you've made it this far. So thank you so much for continuing to be here and continuing to watch these videos. I'm just having a lot of fun making them and I hope that they're enjoyable to some of you too. So thank you. Bye.